The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Veterans Affairs office in San Diego when Sarah Martinez stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic. She pulled her baseball cap low over her eyes and adjusted the collar of her worn leather jacket. At 32, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more than most people twice her age. But today, that confidence felt fragile. Sarah had been living quietly for the past 18 months, working nights at a small security company and keeping to herself. After everything she had been through, anonymity felt like a gift. She had earned the right to disappear into civilian life, even if that life felt hollow compared to what she had left behind. The VA office was busy with the usual crowd of veterans seeking help with benefits, medical care, and the 1,000 other bureaucratic tangles that came with military service. Sarah took a number and found a seat in the back corner, away from the clusters of men sharing war stories and complaints about the system. She had learned long ago that it was easier to listen than to explain. "Sarah Martinez?" The clerk's voice cut through the ambient chatter. She approached the window with the paperwork she had been carrying for weeks. The woman behind the glass looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from processing hundreds of similar requests every month. "I need to update my benefits information," Sarah said quietly, sliding the forms through the slot. The clerk glanced at the papers, then at Sarah, then back at the papers. Her expression shifted from routine boredom to confusion, then to something that looked like suspicion. "Ma'am, there seems to be an issue with your records," the clerk said, her voice now carrying an edge. "According to our system, the service record you've listed here doesn't exist." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" "The unit you claim to have served with, the dates of service, the deployments, none of this matches anything in our database. And this military occupational specialty code..." The clerk squinted at the screen. "This doesn't exist either." Other veterans in line behind Sarah were beginning to notice the holdup. She could feel their attention like heat on the back of her neck. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid. "There must be some mistake," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. "I can provide additional documentation." "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you to step aside. This is going to require some additional verification." Sarah moved to a bench near the window and waited while the clerk made several phone calls. Each conversation seemed to increase the woman's agitation. Finally, she gestured for Sarah to return to the window. "Ms. Martinez, I've spoken with my supervisor, and we're going to need to escalate this. The service record you've provided appears to be fabricated. I'm required to inform you that falsifying military service records is a federal crime." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Around her, conversations had stopped. Every eye in the waiting area was now fixed on her. She could see the judgment forming on their faces. Another stolen valor case, another civilian trying to claim benefits and respect they hadn't earned. "I served," Sarah said quietly, but firmly. "Every day listed on that record, every deployment, every mission, I earned my place. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to remain here while I contact the appropriate authorities." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she returned to the bench. She understood now what had happened. Her service records were classified at a level that even the VA systems couldn't access. She had known this day might come, but she had hoped that nearly 2 years of quiet civilian life might have been enough to avoid it. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers, both veterans themselves based on their bearing and the subtle military-style haircuts they maintained years after leaving service. The older one, a sergeant named Williams, approached her with professional courtesy but clear authority. "Ms. Martinez, we need to ask you some questions about your military service claims." "I understand," Sarah said, standing slowly with her hands visible. She had learned long ago that cooperation made everything easier for everyone involved. You're under arrest for making false claims regarding military service, Williams said, beginning to read her rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Sarah caught sight of the other veterans watching her arrest. Some looked angry, others disappointed. A few seemed pleased that another faker had been caught. None of them could know the truth, that she had earned her place in one of the most elite units in the military, that she had served in places they couldn't pronounce on missions they would never read about in any newspaper. The booking process at the San Diego County Jail was routine and humiliating. They photographed her, fingerprinted her, and processed her into the system like any other criminal. Sarah answered their questions with single words when possible, volunteering nothing. Her arrest report listed the charges as fraudulent enlistment claims and false representation of military service. In her cell that night, Sarah stared at the concrete ceiling and thought about the irony of her situation. She had spent 8 years serving her country in ways that would never be acknowledged, protecting people who would never know her name, and now she was being prosecuted for claiming that service existed. The next morning brought a different kind of attention. Word of her arrest had somehow made it to the local media, and by noon, her story was being shared across social media as another example of stolen valor. The headlines were predictably harsh. Woman arrested for fake SEAL claims, and another phony hero exposed. Sarah's attorney, a harried public defender named James Chen, met with her that afternoon in the jail's attorney conference room. He looked overwhelmed and skeptical. "Ms. Martinez, I have to be honest with you," Chen said, spreading her file across the small table. "The evidence against you looks pretty solid. The military has no record of your service, and the documentation you provided appears to reference units and classifications that don't exist." "They exist," Sarah said quietly. "They just exist in a way that most people can't see." Chen looked at her with the expression she had seen countless times over the past day, the look of someone trying to determine if they were dealing with a delusional person or a calculating liar. "Look, I've handled stolen valor cases before," he said. "The best thing you can do is cooperate with the prosecution. If you're willing to admit the charges and show remorse, we might be able to work out a plea deal that keeps you out of federal prison." "I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do. Ms. Martinez, I understand that admitting this is difficult, but the evidence is incomplete, because the people gathering it don't have the clearance to see the complete picture." Chen closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Then help me understand. If you really served, where are the people who served with you? Where are the officers who can vouch for your service? Why isn't anyone stepping forward to defend you?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. How could she explain that the people who knew the truth about her service were bound by security oaths that carried prison sentences if violated? How could she make him understand that the nature of her work meant that even acknowledging her existence could compromise ongoing operations and endanger lives? "They can't," she said finally. "Not officially." "Then unofficially?" "Even unofficially would be too dangerous for them." Chen looked frustrated. "Ms. Martinez, I want to help you, but you're not giving me anything to work with. If you have any documentation, any contacts, any proof at all of your military service, now is the time to share it." Sarah thought about the small storage unit across town where she kept the few mementos of her military career. Photos with faces blurred beyond recognition, challenge coins from units that officially didn't exist, and a single tattoo on her shoulder that only a handful of people in the world would recognize for what it really meant. "There might be someone," she said slowly, "but reaching out to them would mean exposing them to risk." "What kind of risk?" "The kind that could end careers or worse." Chen gathered up his papers and stood to leave. "Think about it overnight. Tomorrow we'll start preparing your defense, but I need you to understand that without some kind of verification of your service, we're fighting an uphill battle against a federal prosecutor who thinks they have an open and shut case. That night, Sarah lay on her narrow bunk and thought about the men and women she had served with over the years. She thought about Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, who had been her first team leader and had taught her that being smaller and underestimated could be a tactical advantage. She thought about Chief Petty Officer Thompson, who had saved her life in Syria and had never once treated her differently because she was a woman in a unit where women weren't supposed to exist. Most of all, she thought about Admiral Patricia Hayes, who had personally recruited her into the program and who had been both a mentor and a protector during the years when Sarah's very existence had been a classified secret. Hayes had retired 6 months ago after a career that spanned 3 decades and conflicts on 4 continents. She was now living quietly in Virginia, far from the spotlight and the responsibilities she had carried for so long. Sarah had promised herself that she would never reach out to any of them unless it was a matter of life and death. Sitting in a jail cell, facing federal charges that could send her to prison for years, she wondered if that threshold had been crossed. The morning brought another visit from Chen, along with news that made Sarah's situation even more complicated. "The story's gone viral," he said, sitting down across from her with a tablet showing social media feeds. "There are thousands of comments, most of them pretty angry. You've become a symbol of stolen valor, and the prosecutor is feeling pressure to make an example out of you." Sarah scrolled through some of the comments and felt sick. Veterans who had served honorably were calling for her to receive the maximum sentence. Active duty service members were sharing the story with angry commentary about people who dishonored their sacrifice. The few voices defending her were drowned out by the chorus of condemnation. "There's something else," Chen continued. "I've been contacted by the FBI. They want to interview you about potential connections to other stolen valor cases and possible fraud networks." "Fraud networks?" "Apparently there's been an increase in sophisticated false military records recently. They think you might be part of a larger operation that creates fake service histories for people trying to claim benefits or gain employment based on military experience they don't have." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The situation was spiraling beyond anything she had anticipated. Not only was she being prosecuted for claiming service that she had actually performed, but now she was being investigated as part of a criminal conspiracy. "I need to make a phone call," she said. "To who?" "Someone who might be able to help." Chen looked hopeful for the first time since they had met. "A witness? Someone who can verify your service?" "Maybe. But if I make this call, there's no going back. People who have tried to stay out of the spotlight are going to be pulled into this mess. Ms. Martinez, at this point, you need all the help you can get." Sarah nodded slowly. She had spent 18 months trying to live quietly, trying not to complicate the lives of the people who had served alongside her in places that didn't appear on any map. But now, facing the possibility of years in federal prison for crimes she hadn't committed, she was out of options. "I'll make the call," she said. "But I need you to understand that what happens next might be bigger than either of us expected." Chen looked puzzled, but he nodded. "Whatever help you can get, we'll take it." As they walked back toward the jail's communication area, Sarah wondered if she was making the right choice. She had spent her military career in the shadows, protecting people who would never know her name. Now, she was about to step into the light, and she had no idea what the consequences might be for the people she had served with or for the operations that might still be ongoing. But as she reached for the phone to make the call that would change everything, Sarah knew that she couldn't let the lie stand. She had earned her place among the elite, and she had served her country with honor. If proving that meant exposing secrets that had been kept for years, then that was a price she was willing to pay. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Admiral Hayes' office." This is Sarah Martinez. I need to speak with the Admiral. Tell her it's about Trident 7. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then, "Hold, please." Sarah waited, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether she spent the next few years in federal prison or whether the truth about her service would finally come to light. Either way, her quiet civilian life was over. Admiral Patricia Hayes was enjoying her morning coffee on the deck of her Chesapeake Bay home when her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call. Retirement had been good to her. No more pre-dawn briefings, no more congressional hearings about operations she couldn't discuss, no more sleepless nights worrying about operators in harm's way halfway around the world. But when her aide mentioned the words Trident 7, those peaceful months evaporated instantly. She knew exactly who Sarah Martinez was, though she hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over 2 years. More importantly, she knew what Sarah had done for her country and the price the young woman had paid for that service. Hayes had personally recruited Sarah into a program so classified that its existence was known to fewer than 50 people in the entire defense establishment. "Get me on the next flight to San Diego," Hayes told her aide, "and contact the Pentagon. Tell them I need to speak with the Secretary of Defense immediately." "Ma'am, regarding what matter?" Hayes looked out at the calm water of the bay and felt the familiar weight of command settling back onto her shoulders. "Tell them it's about protecting national security interests and honoring commitments made to personnel who served in classified operations. Should I mention the Martinez situation? Not over any communication channel. This needs to be handled face-to-face." While Hayes made arrangements to travel west, Sarah sat in her jail cell trying to explain to her attorney why she couldn't provide more details about the phone call she had made. "She said she would handle it," Sarah told Chen. "That's all I can tell you right now." "Ms. Martinez, I need more than that. Who is this Admiral Hayes? What was this Trident 7 you mentioned? The prosecution is going to want answers, and frankly, so do I." Sarah understood Chen's frustration, but she also understood that certain secrets carried consequences that extended far beyond her current legal troubles. "Admiral Hayes was my commanding officer for the last 4 years of my service. Trident 7 was an operation we were involved in." "That's all I can say without compromising people who are still serving." Chen looked at his notes and shook his head. "The prosecution called this morning. They're accelerating the timeline for your case. With all the media attention, there's pressure from Washington to resolve this quickly and publicly. They want to send a message about stolen valor prosecutions." "How much time do we have?" "They want to arraign you tomorrow morning. After that, we'll have maybe 2 weeks to prepare for trial unless we can negotiate a plea agreement." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Even if Admiral Hayes was willing to help, the bureaucratic machinery of the justice system was moving faster than any military intervention could likely manage. She was beginning to understand why so many veterans in her situation simply accepted plea agreements rather than fighting charges they knew were false. That afternoon, while Sarah waited in her cell, Admiral Hayes was sitting in the Pentagon office of Secretary of Defense Robert Morrison. Morrison had served as a Marine officer before entering politics, and he understood the delicate balance between operational security and supporting veterans who had served in classified programs. "Patricia, you're asking me to potentially expose a program that cost billions of dollars and took years to develop," Morrison said, reviewing the classified file Hayes had brought with her. "And for what? One operator who should have known better than to try to access public benefits?" "Bob, with respect, Sarah Martinez didn't do anything wrong. She served with distinction for 8 years in operations that directly protected American interests. The fact that her service was classified doesn't make it any less real or valuable. But you know as well as I do that acknowledging her service means acknowledging the program existed. And if we do that, we compromise every other operator who served in similar capacities." Hayes had anticipated this argument. Not necessarily. We can verify her service without revealing operational details. A simple confirmation that she served in a classified capacity, dates of service, and honorable discharge status. Nothing more. Morrison walked to the window overlooking the Potomac River. And what happens when every defense attorney in the country starts demanding similar confirmations for their clients? What happens when foreign intelligence services start connecting dots we've spent years keeping separated? Then we deal with those situations as they arise, but we can't let a decorated veteran go to federal prison because we're afraid of hypothetical consequences. The conversation was interrupted by Morrison's aide, who entered with an urgent message. "Sir, there's been a development in the Martinez case that you need to know about." Morrison read the message and his expression darkened. "It says here that the FBI investigation has expanded. They think Martinez might be connected to a foreign intelligence operation designed to identify and compromise veterans with access to classified information." Hayes felt her blood pressure rising. "That's ridiculous. Sarah Martinez is one of the most patriotic people I've ever served with. She risked her life repeatedly for this country." "Maybe so, but the FBI doesn't know that. All they see is someone with fabricated military records who suddenly has high-level military contacts intervening on her behalf. From their perspective, this looks exactly like a foreign intelligence operation." "Then we need to clear this up immediately." Morrison sat back down at his desk. "Patricia, I want to help, but I need more than your word that this woman is legitimate. If I'm going to risk exposing a classified program, I need verification from multiple sources." Hayes pulled out her secure phone. "Give me 2 hours. I'll get you the verification you need." Over the next several hours, Hayes contacted 6 different retired and active duty officers who had worked with Sarah Martinez during her classified service. Each conversation was carefully worded to avoid revealing specific operational details, but the message was clear. Sarah Martinez had served with distinction in highly classified operations, and her current legal troubles were the result of bureaucratic systems that couldn't access her true service record. The most important call was to General Michael Chen, the current director of Special Operations, who had personally signed off on several of Sarah's missions. "Mike, I need you to help me save one of our people," Hayes said without preamble. "What kind of trouble?" "The worst kind. She's being prosecuted for stolen valor because her service records are too classified for the civilian justice system to access." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jesus, Patricia. How did we let this happen?" "We let it happen because we got so focused on operational security that we forgot about taking care of our people after their service ended. Now I need you to help me fix it." "What do you need?" "I need you to personally verify her service record to the Secretary of Defense. No operational details, just confirmation that she served honorably in classified operations from 2014 to 2022. Consider it done. But Patricia, we need to have a bigger conversation about how we support people who serve in these programs after they transition to civilian life. This can't happen again." "Agreed, but first, let's save Sarah Martinez." By evening, Morrison had received verification from 4 different sources, including General Chen, that Sarah Martinez had indeed served in highly classified operations for 8 years. The next challenge was figuring out how to use this information to resolve her legal situation without compromising ongoing national security interests. "I'm willing to provide limited verification of her service," Morrison told Hayes in a late-night conference call. "But it has to be handled carefully. No public statements, no congressional briefings, no media interviews. We provide the minimum information necessary to resolve the criminal charges, and that's it." "Understood. How do we make contact with her legal team?" "I'm sending someone from the Defense Department's legal office to San Diego tonight. They'll coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the local prosecutors. With any luck, we can resolve this quietly before it goes to trial." Meanwhile, in San Diego, Sarah was experiencing the strangest night of her incarceration. Word had somehow spread through the jail that she was a fake SEAL, and she found herself isolated from other inmates who viewed stolen valor as one of the lowest forms of dishonesty. Even the guards seemed to view her with a mixture of disappointment and contempt. She spent most of the night awake, thinking about the teammates she had served with over the years. Many of them had struggled with the transition to civilian life, but none had faced anything like her current situation. The classified nature of their service meant that they couldn't even seek help from traditional veteran support organizations without risking security violations. At 3 a.m., a guard approached her cell. "Martinez, you have a visitor." Sarah was confused. Visiting hours had ended hours ago, and she hadn't requested any meetings. She was escorted to a small conference room where a man in a navy suit was waiting with Chen and another person she didn't recognize. "Ms. Martinez, I'm David Walsh from the Department of Defense Legal Office," the man said, standing to shake her hand. "I apologize for the unusual hour, but we have some urgent matters to discuss." Sarah looked at Chen, who seemed as surprised as she was. "What's going on?" "Ms. Martinez, I've been authorized to inform you that certain aspects of your military service have been verified by appropriate authorities within the Department of Defense. We're currently working with federal prosecutors to resolve the charges against you." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. But she was also suspicious. "What kind of verification?" "Limited verification of your dates of service, rank achieved, and honorable discharge status. Nothing more specific than that for obvious security reasons." Chen leaned forward. "What does this mean for the charges?" "It means that the federal stolen valor charges will likely be dropped within the next 24 hours. The local charges may take slightly longer to resolve, but we expect those to be dismissed as well once the prosecutors understand the situation." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing what she was hearing. "What about the media attention? What about all the people who think I'm a fraud?" Walsh looked uncomfortable. "That's more complicated. We can't make public statements about classified operations, which means we can't publicly vindicate you without compromising national security. The best we can do is quietly resolve the legal issues and let the story fade from public attention. So everyone will still think I'm a liar." "Some people will, yes, but the people who matter, the people in the military and veteran communities who understand how these situations can arise, they'll figure it out eventually." Chen spoke up. "Ms. Martinez, I know this isn't the complete vindication you deserve, but it's better than federal prison." Sarah nodded slowly. She understood the constraints they were working under, and she was grateful for the intervention. But she also knew that her reputation in the veteran community might never fully recover from the accusations that had been made against her. "There's one more thing," Walsh said. "Admiral Hayes would like to speak with you when you're released. She has some ideas about how to help you rebuild your civilian life." "When will I be released?" "Probably tomorrow afternoon, once all the paperwork is processed." After Walsh left, Sarah sat with Chen for a few more minutes discussing what would happen next. The charges would be dropped, but the media attention meant that her name was now permanently associated with stolen valor accusations. Finding employment would be difficult, and she would probably have to relocate to somewhere that people didn't recognize her name. "I'm sorry this happened to you," Chen said as they prepared to leave. "The system failed you in a pretty spectacular way." "The system was designed to protect national security, not individual veterans," Sarah replied. "I understood the risks when I signed up for classified service. I just didn't think those risks would include being prosecuted for admitting that the service existed." As she was escorted back to her cell, Sarah reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. In less than 48 hours, she had gone from being an anonymous security guard to being a national symbol of stolen valor to being quietly vindicated by some of the highest levels of the defense establishment. Tomorrow, she would be free, but she would also be a person without a clear identity or future. The next morning brought one final surprise. As Sarah was processing out of the jail, a corrections officer handed her a note that had been delivered earlier that morning. "Someone dropped this off for you about an hour ago," the officer said. Sarah opened the note and recognized Admiral Hayes's distinctive handwriting. "Sarah, your service mattered then, and it matters now. The people who know the truth understand what you sacrificed for this country. Don't let the noise from people who don't know the facts define how you see yourself. We take care of our own, even when we have to do it quietly. Call me when you're ready to figure out what comes next. P. Hayes." As Sarah walked out of the San Diego County Jail into the afternoon sunshine, she realized that her story wasn't over. The legal charges might be resolved, but the larger questions about how the military supported veterans who had served in classified operations were just beginning to be addressed. She had survived the crisis, but now she had to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been shattered by circumstances beyond her control. The phone number Admiral Hayes had written on the note felt like a lifeline, but Sarah also knew that accepting help meant continuing to be connected to a world she had been trying to leave behind. Standing on the sidewalk outside the jail, Sarah Martinez took a deep breath and began planning the next chapter of her life. 3 days after her release from jail, Sarah Martinez stood in the parking lot of a small diner in La Jolla, watching Admiral Patricia Hayes step out of a rental car. Even in retirement, Hayes carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had commanded respect at the highest levels of the military. She was smaller than Sarah remembered, but her presence still filled the space around her. "You look tired," Hayes said as they embraced briefly in the parking lot. "It's been a long week," Sarah replied. They found a quiet booth in the back of the diner, away from other customers who might recognize Sarah from the news coverage that was still circulating online. Even though the charges had been dropped, the internet had a long memory, and her name remained associated with the stolen valor allegations. "I'm sorry it took so long for us to intervene," Hayes said after they ordered coffee. "The system we created to protect classified operations wasn't designed to protect the operators after they left service. I understood the risks when I signed up. You understood some of the risks. But nobody told you that you might be prosecuted for acknowledging your own service existed." Sarah stirred her coffee and looked out the window at the Pacific Ocean. "What happens now? I can't go back to my old job. My name is all over the internet as someone who faked military service. Even though the charges were dropped, most people still think I'm a fraud." Hayes reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. There are some people in Washington who think we need to do better at supporting veterans who served in classified programs. Your case has gotten attention at levels you wouldn't believe." "What kind of attention?" "The kind that results in new policies and procedures. The Secretary of Defense has authorized the creation of a new office specifically to handle veteran affairs for people who served in classified operations. They're looking for someone to run it." Sarah looked up from her coffee, surprised. "Someone like who?" "Someone like you. Someone who understands the unique challenges these veterans face because they've lived through them." The offer was unexpected, but Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to step back into the world she had been trying to leave behind. "I appreciate the thought, Admiral, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for something like that. Look what just happened to me." "What happened to you is exactly why you're the right person. You understand how the system can fail people who served their country honorably. You know what needs to be fixed." They were interrupted by a young man approaching their table. Sarah tensed, expecting another confrontation about the stolen valor allegations, but the man's expression was respectful. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Hayes. "Are you Admiral Hayes?" "I am." "Sir, I'm Petty Officer 2nd Class Williams. I served under your command in Afghanistan in 2019. I just wanted to say thank you for everything you did for us over there." Hayes smiled and shook his hand. "Thank you for your service, Petty Officer. How are you doing in civilian life?" "Good, sir. I'm using my GI benefits to study engineering at UC San Diego. After he left, Hayes turned back to Sarah. That's what this is about. Taking care of our people, all of our people, even the ones whose service can't be publicly acknowledged. What would this new office actually do? Create secure channels for classified veterans to access benefits without compromising operational security. Develop protocols for handling situations like yours before they become criminal matters. Provide support and resources for people transitioning from classified operations to civilian life. Sarah considered the proposal. It would mean staying connected to the military world she had been trying to escape, but it would also mean helping people avoid the nightmare she had just experienced. I'd have to think about it. Of course. But before you decide, there's something else I want to show you. Hayes pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a series of messages from veterans who had served in classified operations. Some had heard about Sarah's case through unofficial channels and wanted to express their support. Others shared their own struggles with accessing benefits or finding employment after leaving classified programs. You're not alone in this, Hayes said. There are hundreds of people who served in programs like ours, and many of them are struggling with the same issues you faced. They need someone who understands their situation to advocate for them. As they prepared to leave the diner, Sarah noticed two men at the counter who had been watching their table. She recognized the signs immediately, the way they positioned themselves to observe without appearing to stare, the careful attention to their surroundings, the subtle earpieces they thought were hidden by their hair. "Admiral," Sarah said quietly. "We have company." Hayes glanced over and nodded. "They've been with me since I arrived in San Diego. Pentagon security. Apparently, my involvement in your case has made some people nervous about my continued access to classified information. I'm sorry. I never wanted to cause problems for you. You didn't cause anything. The problems already existed. Your case just exposed them." Outside the diner, Hayes walked with Sarah toward the beach. The two security officers maintained a discreet distance, but their presence was a reminder of the complex world they had both served in. "There's one more thing," Hayes said as they reached the sand. "I want you to meet someone." A few minutes later, a man in his 50s approached them along the beach. Sarah recognized him immediately, even though she hadn't seen him in over 2 years. Lieutenant Colonel David Rodriguez had been her first team leader when she joined the classified program, and he had taught her many of the skills that had kept her alive during her years of service. "Sarah Martinez," Rodriguez said with a smile, embracing her warmly. "I heard you had some excitement recently." "That's one way to put it. I also heard you handled it with the same grace under pressure you showed in the field. That doesn't surprise me at all." The three of them walked along the beach as Rodriguez explained that he was now working in the Pentagon office that oversaw special operations personnel policies. He had been involved in the discussions about creating the new Veteran Affairs office Hayes had mentioned. "We need someone who's been through the system and understands its flaws," Rodriguez said. "Someone who has credibility with the veteran community and the political skills to navigate Washington bureaucracy." "I'm not sure I have political skills," Sarah said. "You survived 8 years in a program that officially didn't exist. Maintained operational security while building relationships with foreign partners who didn't trust Americans, and just talked your way out of federal prison. Trust me, you have political skills." As they continued walking, Sarah noticed Rodriguez glance at her shoulder where her tattoo was visible beneath her t-shirt. It was a small design that most people would assume was decorative, but Sarah knew that Rodriguez understood its true meaning. "You still have the ink," he observed. Sarah pulled up her sleeve to reveal the tattoo more clearly. It was an intricate design that incorporated several symbols, a trident, a number 7, and a small anchor. To most observers, it would look like a standard naval tattoo, but the specific combination and placement marked her as someone who had served in one of the military's most classified programs. "I thought about having it removed," Sarah said. especially after everything that happened this week. Don't, Rodriguez said firmly. That ink represents something real. It represents sacrifice and service that most people will never understand. Removing it won't change what you accomplished. Hayes had been listening to their conversation with interest. David's right. You earned that tattoo, and you earned the respect that comes with it. Don't let other people's ignorance make you ashamed of your service. They had walked nearly a mile down the beach when Sarah noticed another group approaching them. At first, she assumed it was more security personnel. But as they got closer, she realized it was a group of veterans. Some were young, others middle-aged, but they all had the bearing of people who had seen combat. The leader of the group, a woman in her 40s with graying hair, approached Hayes directly. "Admiral Hayes?" she said. "I'm Master Chief Sarah Thompson, retired. I served under your command in 2018. I wanted to thank you for what you've done for our community this week." Hayes looked confused. "I'm not sure I understand." "Word has gotten out about what happened to Sister Martinez here," Thompson said, nodding toward Sarah. "The way you stepped up to protect one of our own has reminded a lot of us why we served. It's also reminded us that we need to look out for each other better." More veterans began gathering around them. Some Sarah recognized from her service, others were strangers, but all of them seemed to understand something that the general public hadn't grasped about her situation. One of the younger veterans, a man with visible scarring on his arms, spoke up. "Ma'am, we know what happened to you wasn't right. Some of us have been dealing with similar issues, not being able to prove our service because of classification levels, having trouble accessing benefits, being questioned about our military experience." Thompson continued, "We've been talking, and we think it's time for us to be more visible. Obviously, we can't talk about operational details, but we can advocate for better support systems for people who served in classified programs." Sarah realized that her legal troubles had inadvertently created something she hadn't expected, a community of veterans who had previously been isolated by the classified nature of their service. They were coming together to support each other and to advocate for systemic changes. "What are you proposing?" Hayes asked. "A veterans organization specifically for people who served in classified operations," Thompson replied. "Something that can provide support and advocacy while respecting security requirements. We can't be completely open about what we did, but we can be open about the fact that we served and that we deserve support." Rodriguez looked interested. "That could work well with the new Pentagon office we're creating. Having an external advocacy organization would give us credibility and feedback from the veteran community." As the group continued discussing their ideas, Sarah found herself thinking about the job offer Hayes had presented. A week ago, she had been trying to disappear into civilian life. Now, she was being offered a chance to help create systemic change that could benefit hundreds of veterans facing similar challenges. "Admiral," Sarah said, interrupting the conversation, "about that job offer." "Yes? I'm interested, but I have some conditions." Hayes smiled. "I'm listening. I want to work with veterans like Master Chief Thompson to make sure this new office addresses real problems, not just bureaucratic concerns. I want authority to make real changes, not just to manage existing systems. And I want to ensure that people who serve in classified operations in the future don't face the same problems we're dealing with now. Those are reasonable conditions." Sarah looked around at the group of veterans who had gathered on the beach. A week ago, most of them had been strangers to each other, isolated by the classified nature of their service. Now they were forming a community based on shared experience and mutual support. "There's one more thing," Sarah said. "I want this new office to help create opportunities for classified veterans to tell their stories, even if they can't share operational details. People need to understand that we exist, that we served, and that we deserve the same recognition and support as any other veteran." Rodriguez nodded. "That's going to be challenging." But it's important. The American people need to know that there are veterans who served in ways they can't fully understand, and that those veterans deserve respect and support. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, the group of veterans exchanged contact information and made plans to continue their conversations about advocacy and support. Sarah realized that her arrest for stolen valor had inadvertently created something positive. A community of veterans who had been serving in isolation were now working together to support each other and to create change. Walking back toward the parking lot, Hayes put her hand on Sarah's shoulder, right over the tattoo that had marked her as a member of an elite community. "You know," Hayes said quietly, "when I first recruited you into the program, I told you that the hardest part wouldn't be the missions or the training. I told you it would be living with secrets that you could never share. I remember. I was wrong. The hardest part is what comes after, figuring out how to honor your service when most of the world can't know what that service was. But you figured it out. You found a way to turn your experience into something that helps other people." Sarah looked back at the group of veterans still talking on the beach. "We've figured it out, all of us together." As she drove home that evening, Sarah thought about how much her life had changed in just 1 week. She had gone from being an anonymous security guard to being arrested for crimes she hadn't committed to being offered a position that could help hundreds of veterans. The tattoo on her shoulder, which she had considered having removed just days earlier, now felt like a badge of honor that connected her to a community she was proud to serve. The next morning, Sarah called Admiral Hayes to accept the job offer. Her quiet civilian life was officially over, but she was ready to begin the next chapter of her service. This time, fighting for veterans who had served their country in ways that could never be fully acknowledged or understood by the general public. 6 months later, the new office had helped dozens of veterans access benefits and support services, and the veterans organization Master Chief Thompson had proposed was growing rapidly. Sarah's name was still associated with the stolen valor controversy in some corners of the internet, but in the veteran community, she was becoming known as someone who fought for people who had been forgotten by the system. The ink on her shoulder remained exactly where it had always been, a permanent reminder of service that was real, valuable, and worthy of respect, regardless of whether the broader world could understand or acknowledge it.